I almost canceled 3 times. The first time was at 6:15, standing in my bathroom in mismatched socks, holding my phone with the cab app open and my thumb hovering over the cancel button like it was a detonator. The second time was at 6:40, when I'd changed outfits, twice and somehow ended up in a combination that made me look like I was attending either a job interview or a funeral, possibly both. The third time was at 7:02, when I was already in the elevator of my apartment building in Schwabing, descending toward the lobby, and I genuinely considered pressing the button for floor 3 and riding back up and pretending the evening had never been proposed. But I didn't. And I want you to understand exactly what that cost me, because everything that followed, every extraordinary, terrifying, beautiful thing, began with that single act of reluctant bravery. My name is Lena Bergmann. I'm 29. I work in financial analysis at Kessler & Brandt, one of Munich's mid-sized but quietly prestigious investment management firms. I'm good at my job, careful, precise, the kind of person who triple checks formulas and color codes, spreadsheets for her own personal satisfaction. In my professional life, I project calm. I speak in measured sentences. I wear blazers that fit properly. I am, by all observable metrics, a composed and functional adult. In my personal life, I was a minor disaster. Not dramatically so. No soap opera collapses, no tabloid-worthy crises. Just quietly, persistently bad at the part of life that happened outside the office. I kept buying too much rosemary at the market and watching it die on my windowsill. I had 11 tabs open on my laptop at all times and could not tell you what was in 7 of them, and I had not been on a date in 14 months. So when my friend Miriam, cheerful, relentless, absolutely certain she knew what was good for me, announced that she had arranged a blind date for me, I had said yes in a moment of weakness so profound, I'm not sure I've fully recovered from it. He's thoughtful, she had told me over coffee, 3 days before the evening in question. He's kind. He volunteers. He reads actual books, Lena, paper ones. You make him sound like an endangered species, I'd said. He might be, she'd replied completely seriously. Please just go. So I went. Please watch the full video, because what happens next will completely blow your mind, and I promise you I am not being dramatic. If anything, I'm underselling it. My apartment, when I'd left it that evening, was in the precise state of chaos that only a person experiencing low-grade existential panic can produce. The bed was littered with rejected outfit, a gray wrap dress, 2 different blouses, a blazer I'd tried and immediately removed because it felt too work, which was ironic given what was coming. I slid into the chair across from the empty seat and placed my small bag on the table, then moved it to the floor, then picked it up and put it on the table again. The waiter, young, friendly, with the name Jonas on a small pin, brought me a glass of sparkling water and asked if I'd like to see the wine list. While I waited, I said yes gratefully, mostly so I'd have something to look at. I was reading the wine list with the focused attention of a person not reading the wine list at all, but rather composing herself when I heard the door open. I didn't look up immediately. I was mid-sentence, on an internal monologue about whether it would seem desperate to order a glass before he arrived, and I was resolving this question in favor of yes, order the wine, when something changed in the room. Not loudly, not obviously. A very quiet shift in the quality of the air, the kind you can't point to afterward, but which you felt absolutely in the moment. I looked up. The first thing I noticed was that he was taller than I had expected, which is a strange thing to notice about someone you've never consciously expected anything of. He was standing near the entrance, speaking quietly to the maître d', wearing a dark navy jacket over a charcoal shirt, no tie, collar open, the careful casual of a man who'd also changed his outfit and arrived at something intentional. He had dark blonde hair, slightly disheveled in a way that felt unplanned, and a jaw that suggested someone who clenched it sometimes. His hands, I noticed even from across the room, were the hands of someone who thought with them, moving slightly as he spoke, not gesturally, just present. And then the maître d' turned and gestured toward table 7, and the man turned with him, and I saw his face full on for the first time, and the wine list dropped approximately 4 inches toward the table from my suddenly loosened fingers before I caught it, because I knew that face. I knew it from morning briefings, where it sat at the head of the table and asked questions that made people sharpen their thoughts mid-sentence. I knew it from the all-company announcement sent with his name beneath them in a font that carried weight. I knew it from the framed portrait on the 7th floor near the elevator, which I passed every single morning on my way to my desk. Felix Kessler, CEO of Kessler & Brandt, my employer, my boss's boss's boss, the man whose quarterly expectations I spent the better part of my professional life trying to meet. No, I thought, with the focused clarity of absolute panic. No, absolutely not. He was walking toward me. He hadn't recognized me yet. His eyes were scanning the room, with the mild attentiveness of someone arriving somewhere new, and I had a window of perhaps 4 seconds in which to do something. What that something was, I had no idea. Become the table, slide onto the floor and invent a story about a dropped earring, simply cease to exist. Instead, I sat perfectly still, and he arrived at table 7, and his eyes landed on me and I watched. In almost cinematic slow motion, the exact moment he realized, it moved across his face like weather, a flicker of easy social anticipation, the face of a person about to meet a stranger. Pleasantly, and then, something behind his eyes shifted, sharpened, recalibrated. A small pause, not rude, just a beat of adjustment, and then, with what I can only describe as remarkable composure, Felix Kessler pulled out the chair across from me, sat down and said, "Lena Bergmann," not a question. A statement. He was processing the same information I was, just faster. "Mr. Kessler," I said, and my voice came out almost steady, which was one of my finer achievements. A pause. "Felix," he said. "Given the context, I think Felix is appropriate." "Right," I said. "Yes, Felix." His name felt strange in my mouth, like wearing someone else's shoes. Jonas appeared at precisely the wrong moment, cheerful and oblivious to recommend the evening special. We both turned to him with the bright, slightly desperate attention of people very grateful for an interruption. We ordered the wine, a Grauburgunder, his suggestion, which I agreed to because I was incapable of independent thought at that moment. And for the first 7 or 8 minutes of our meal, we discussed the safest possible topics, with the careful energy of bomb disposal experts. Traffic. We discussed the traffic on Sendlinger Tor. He'd come from Maxvorstadt. I'd come from Schwabing. We had both experienced the particular injustice of Munich's Tuesday evening gridlock. This occupied approximately 3 minutes and was, I think, the most extended conversation I'd ever had about traffic, because it was serving as something else entirely. The careful process of 2 people pretending they aren't, recalibrating the entire architecture of their relationship in real time. Then the weather, the mild for February, hadn't it been? And then the restaurant itself, which he'd heard was good, and I said I'd always wanted to try it. And he said he didn't get out enough, which surprised me enough that I responded to the actual content rather than just producing social filler. "You don't?" I said. He looked at me with a slightly self-deprecating expression. "Is that surprising?" "Honestly, a little. You always seem very—" I paused, choosing the word carefully. "Directed. Like you know exactly where you're going." Something shifted in his face, not defensively, more like recognition. "That's the job," he said, "not the person." The food arrived, beautiful plates, delicate arrangements, the kind of meal that deserves attention, and around the second course, something loosened between us. Possibly it was the wine. Possibly it was the recognition, slow and slightly astonishing, that we were both just people sitting in a restaurant, equally ambushed by Miriam's matchmaking, equally uncertain what came next. He told me first about the volunteering. I'd seen his name on the firm's community engagement reports. Kessler and Brandt had a partnership with a youth center in Neuhausen, the Brückenhaus, offering mentoring programs for teenagers from difficult home situations. I'd assumed, in the uncharitable way one sometimes does, that corporate leadership involvement in such programs was largely ceremonial, a photograph, a speech at the annual report. "I go every Thursday," he said, with a directness that left no room for interpretation. "Have for 4 years. I teach a budgeting workshop, basic financial literacy, how money works, how to read a pay stub, how to save." He paused. "Most of them have never had anyone explain that." I thought about what it meant to spend a Thursday evening doing that. Not the optics of it. The actual hours. What made you start? He turned his wine glass slightly in his fingers. That hand thing again. Thinking through touch. My father left when I was 12, he said, with a matter-of-factness that suggested this fact had long since been processed, contextualized, made into something he could say without flinching. My mother worked 3 part-time jobs. I learned about money the way you learn about fire, by getting burned. I figured if I could save someone that particular education, I should. I sat with that for a moment. That's a good reason, I said. What about you, he asked. What do you do with your Thursdays? I laughed, and it was more genuine than I'd planned. Currently, I'm killing a rosemary plant. He smiled, and it was the first time I'd seen him smile in a context that wasn't professional, wasn't performing leadership, wasn't managing a room. It was smaller and slightly crooked, and it changed his face entirely. Rosemary is harder than it looks, he said. Everyone tells me it's easy, I said. They're wrong. Overwatered? Almost certainly. You have to trust it a little, he said. Let it be dry for a bit. It's a Mediterranean plant. It wants the sun and a little neglect. I looked at him. Are we still talking about rosemary? He met my eyes, and there was a beat. One of those conversational moments that hover slightly out of time. And he said, yes, obviously. But we were both smiling. Monday arrived with the bright, indifferent efficiency of all Mondays. I was in the office by 8:15, which is my usual time, and I spent the first 20 minutes of it trying to determine whether my colleagues could somehow tell, simply by looking at me, that I had spent Friday evening having dinner with the CEO. They could not. Of course they could not, but anxiety is not rational, and mine spent the morning inventing scenarios. By 9 o'clock I'd imagined 3 separate versions of how someone might have seen us at the restaurant, each more elaborately catastrophic than the last. Felix, Mr. Kessler. I refused to think of him as Felix at the office, not even internally, and was in the building. I knew this because his assistant, Petra, always sent a brief calendar notification to department heads when executive leadership was present on a floor, a logistical courtesy that had never previously felt personally relevant. The notification arrived at 9:17, and I stared at it for a full 30 seconds. We passed each other in the corridor. Outside the second floor conference room at 10:40. He was with 2 senior partners, mid-conversation, carrying a folder. I was carrying a printout and walking with my head slightly down, because I was reading a footnote, which is exactly the kind of thing I do. I heard him before I saw him. His voice professional and measured, talking about Q1 projections, and I looked up at precisely the moment he glanced in my direction. A beat. 2 people calibrating simultaneously in a crowded corridor. Ms. Bergmann, he said with the perfect neutrality of executive composure. Mr. Kessler, I replied with what I hoped was identical professionalism. We passed each other. I turned a corner and stood there for a moment. Folder pressed against my chest, heart doing something unreasonable. This, I told myself, was going to be complicated. It did not get less complicated. By Wednesday, my colleague Teresa, warm, gossipy in an affectionate way, completely well-intentioned, had noticed that I seemed distracted. By Thursday, I'd sat through a department-wide meeting in which Felix, Mr. Kessler, had presented a new performance framework for the coming quarter, and I had spent 45 minutes trying to look at him the same way I would have 3 weeks ago and failing, because I now knew that his father had left when he was 12, and that he knew about rosemary, and that his smile was different when no one was performing anything. He did not look at me any more or less than he looked at anyone else. He was meticulously, almost impressively professional. I found this both reassuring and, in a way I wasn't ready to examine, slightly disappointing. The second meeting happened not at the office and not by arrangement, but by the particular coincidence that the universe apparently felt I hadn't been sufficiently disrupted. Miriam, who had taken a great interest in how the blind date had gone and who I had given a carefully edited version, fine, interesting, complicated, please stop asking, had been involved for years in a community literacy initiative that operated out of the same Neuhausen youth center, the Brückenhaus, and where Felix volunteered. She'd been asking me for months to come and help with their Saturday reading program. I had been meaning to say yes. I said yes that particular Saturday, partly out of genuine intention and partly because, post-dinner, I was trying to reconnect with the version of myself that existed outside the office and outside the anxious spiral of wondering what came next. I was reading aloud to a group of 12 and 13-year-olds, a chapter from a thriller, the kind teenagers actually enjoy, when I heard voices in the corridor outside the open door. One of them was familiar enough to produce by now a very specific involuntary physiological response. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, following a staff member and talking, and then he saw me, and the same calibration happened as in the corridor. That quiet, mutual moment of recognition, and except that here, out of the office, with kids looking between us with the alert curiosity of young people who notice everything, he simply smiled. Not the professional smile, the crooked, smaller one. "You're here," he said. "Miriam," I said by way of full explanation. "She's relentless," he said. "She really is," I agreed. One of the kids, and a 13-year-old named Emre, with very direct eyes and the air of someone who had been watching adults navigate awkward situations his whole life, looked between us and said, "Do you two know each other?" "We work together," I said. "Kind of," Felix said, at exactly the same moment, which made me look at him, because kind of was an interesting word choice from the CEO about an analyst 4 organizational layers below him. Emre looked between us with mild, knowing skepticism and then went back to his book. We worked in parallel that afternoon. His group in the financial literacy workshop down the hall, my group in the reading room. Afterward, in the small staff kitchen while I was rinsing my mug, he appeared in the doorway with a coffee cup of his own. "You're good with them," he said. "You can't possibly know that," I said. "You were down the hall," Emre told me. I turned around. "He did? He said you did the voices," Felix said with a tone of genuine respect. "Different voices for different characters. He said it was, and I quote, actually not terrible." "High praise," I said. "From Emre? It's extraordinary." We stood there in the small kitchen for a moment. Just two people with coffee cups in a community center on a Saturday afternoon. And something shifted gently, almost imperceptibly, like a door opening inward. "I wasn't sure," he said, not looking at me, looking at the counter, whether to suggest doing this again. "Dinner, I mean, given the obvious complications." "The obvious complications," I repeated. "I'm your employer. It's a significant imbalance. You're aware," I said carefully, "that I am also an adult person capable of navigating significant imbalances." He looked at me then. Really looked. "I know. I just wanted to say it out loud. So it wasn't a thing we were pretending wasn't there." I thought about this. About his directness. The way he said uncomfortable things plainly and didn't dress them up. "Okay," I said. "It's there. We both know it's there. What do you want to do with it?" A pause. "Coffee," he said. "Somewhere small. No colleagues. No implications. Just coffee and we see." "Just coffee," I said. "Just coffee," he confirmed. We both knew it wasn't just coffee. The coffee became a habit with the gentle stubbornness of good habits. A place in Heidhausen, small and slightly worn in, with wooden chairs and a blackboard, menu and the smell of freshly ground beans and old paperbacks. We went on 2 consecutive Saturdays, and then a Wednesday evening, and then it stopped being occasions we marked and became simply a thing we did. We argued over coffee about small things first. Whether it was better to read a book knowing nothing about it or knowing everything. He was firmly for total ignorance. I was on the side of informed decision-making, which he said was very you, in a tone that was teasing enough to require a response. I told him his position was romantically irrational. He said mine was analytically overcautious. We were both right. We were both also describing ourselves. He told me about growing up in Augsburg, a quieter version of Bavaria, in an apartment where the walls were thin and his mother played the radio in the kitchen every morning. He told me about studying economics, with the focused intensity of someone who understood that knowledge was mobility. He told me about the weight of inheriting his grandfather's firm he'd joined in his late 20s, worked his way through every department not as a dynasty exercise but as a genuine attempt to understand it, and what it felt like to hold something that had other people's livelihoods threaded through it. I told him about my grandmother, who had been an accountant in the DDR and kept meticulous records of everything right until the end because old habits die hard, and also because she'd once said, if you know exactly where you stand, no one can move the floor on you. I told him about moving to Munich at 23 alone, with 2 suitcases and a spreadsheet of projected expenses, and how the city had felt enormous and promising in equal measure. I told him about the rosemary. Still dying, he asked. Tenaciously, I said. Try a bigger pot, he said. The roots need room. In the office, meanwhile, we were scrupulously, impeccably, exhaustingly professional. He did not look at me differently. I did not act differently. If anyone suspected, and Teresa, I could tell, had begun to develop a theory she hadn't yet fully articulated, it was based on nothing observable, only the intuition that people who know someone well enough always develop. There was one moment in late November, in the elevator, a moment I've returned to many times since. The way you turn over something smooth and worn in your hand. We were the only 2 people in it, descending from the 7th floor, and neither of us was speaking, because we were practicing the professional silence we'd developed. And then the elevator gave a small, mechanical shudder, and nothing serious, a momentary hesitation, and I made a small involuntary sound, and he turned to me, and for 1 second we were just 2 people in a small space, and he said very quietly, okay? And I said yes, and the doors opened, and we walked out into the lobby and went our separate ways. It was so small. It was also, I think, the moment I knew. February came with the particular cold of a Bavarian winter that has decided to make a point, and it brought with it something that nearly unraveled everything. The routine quarterly review of our analytics division flagged an anomaly, a significant one, a set of data reconciliation errors in the reports filed by my team, which I led, which bore my name at the top of the submission over the previous 2 quarters. The errors were not mine. I knew this with absolute certainty, because I had not generated the sections in question. They had come from a junior analyst who had since left the firm, and in the handover process something had been missed. The paperwork existed. The trail was there, but paperwork and trails are not immediately visible when someone from the compliance division is sitting across from you asking pointed questions with a very still expression, and in that moment, visible things are what you desperately need. I spent 3 days in a kind of professional purgatory. Long meetings, document requests, the particular helplessness of knowing you're not wrong but being unable to prove it quickly. Teresa stopped trying to make conversation and just left a chocolate on my desk each morning, with a quiet solidarity that I found unexpectedly very moving. I did not tell Felix. That felt important. I was not going to use whatever existed between us as professional shelter. I would not be the person who did that. What I didn't know, not until later, not until the morning that Petra appeared at my office door and said that compliance had formally cleared the matter, after a thorough documentation review, was that Felix had quietly, without saying a word to me, requested that the original onboarding files for the departed analyst be pulled from HR archives and cross-referenced with the submission records. He hadn't intervened. He hadn't overruled the process. He had simply made sure the right information was in the room. A distinction, I thought, when I learned about it, that mattered enormously, between protection and empowerment. I stood in the corridor outside my office after Petra left, with the particular feeling of a person who has been holding their breath for 3 days and has finally exhaled. 20 minutes later, I went to the 7th floor. I knocked on his door. He looked up from his desk. Something in his expression shifted immediately. The relief of someone who already knew the outcome but had been waiting. You pulled the files, I said. A pause. Someone needed to. You didn't tell me you were doing it. You'd told me not to, not explicitly, but the message was clear. His eyes held mine across the room. I respected that. I just wanted to make sure you had what you needed to stand on your own ground. I stood there for a moment. Felix. Lena. I'm very glad Miriam is relentless. Something happened to his expression that I hadn't seen. Before it's something unguarded and slightly undone. So am I, he said. I'm extraordinarily glad. The gossip happened, as gossip does gradually and then all at once. Teresa's theory was eventually confirmed, tactfully not by us but by the kind of accumulation of small evidence that attentive people eventually assemble, that we arrived at the Brooken House on Saturday morning sometimes at the same time, that we had coffee in a Heidhausen cafe, that two separate colleagues happened to pass on two separate weekday evenings. There were whispers. There were the particular sideways looks that accompany institutional knowledge shifting. Felix addressed it directly, which surprised me and probably shouldn't have by then. He had a quiet conversation with HR. He documented everything appropriately. He ensured that no professional process I was involved in would pass through him without additional review, not as an admission of impropriety but as a structural protection. The rules exist for good reasons, he told me. We work within them. That's not a burden. It's the container. I thought about that word for a long time. Container. The structure that holds something so it can exist safely. The whispers faded, the way whispers do when the thing thereabout stops being hidden and starts being simply true. Spring came. My rosemary, relocated to a larger pot as instructed, began cautiously to thrive. Emre from the Brooken House was accepted to a technical secondary school that required an application essay, which I read 3 drafts of, and which made me cry quietly in my kitchen at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening in the best possible way. Felix's mother came to Munich for a weekend in April, and I had dinner with them, both in a restaurant that was smaller and less elegant than Seidenfaden, but full of the particular warmth of a table where people are comfortable. His mother had his eyes. She looked at me across the table with a warmth that was entirely without performance and said, "He told me about the rosemary," and I looked at Felix, who had the expression of a man pretending he didn't know what was happening, and I loved him so much in that moment I had to look at my napkin for a second. The evening he proposed, we were in the Englischer Garten, which is romantic in the way that significant public parks are romantic. A little imperfect, a little windswept, full of other people and dogs and cyclists, beautiful in the particular way of real things rather than designed ones. It was a Thursday evening after his shift at the Brooken House, and we were walking the path along the Eisbach, and he stopped. He didn't do anything cinematic. He didn't kneel dramatically on the gravel. He just stopped walking and turned to face me, and the evening light was doing something golden with the water behind him. And he said, "I've been trying to figure out the right moment for 4 months, and I've decided there isn't one. There's just, whenever I can't imagine not asking any longer." He had a ring, small and golden exact, which he held out with slightly unsteady hands, and I saw those hands and thought of the first night at the restaurant, when I'd noticed them across the room, before I knew anything, before the panic and the professional territory and the complications, just hands that moved when he thought, just a person arriving toward me through the amber light. "Felix," I said. "Lena," he said, the way he always said my name, like it settled something. "Yes," I said. "Obviously, yes." We went back to Seidenfaden in the summer, not for a special occasion. Just a Tuesday, just because we wanted to. Jonas was still our waiter. The amber light was the same. The menu had changed slightly, but the Grauburgunder was there. We sat at table 7, and I thought about the woman who had sat here 9 months ago with a wine list she wasn't reading, panicking about a blind date, 3 reschedules deep, wearing burgundy because it seemed like the right kind of hope. "What are you thinking?" Felix asked. "That I almost canceled," I said. 3 times. "I almost canceled once," he said. "Which I've never told you." I looked at him. "What stopped you?" He considered this with genuine seriousness. "The suit I'd already put on," he said. It seemed wasteful. I laughed, the kind of laugh that belongs only to people who know each other well, that references 100 other moments at once. "The suit," I said. "The suit," he confirmed. Jonas arrived with our water and said, with the warm recognition of a good waiter, "Welcome back. It's good to see you both." And it was so good to be seen. Outside, Munich moved the way it always did, beautiful and unhurried. The Glockenbach humming with its evening crowd, cyclists ringing their bells, somewhere a window open and music coming out, somewhere a rosemary plant well rooted at last, in a pot large enough to hold it, coming into its own. Some things just need the right container, and a little patience, and someone who stays.